Confidence is increasing on a big snowstorm developing late this weekend into early next week. We finally see the ridging starting to build up over Alaska. That is allowing this trough to sneak in underneath in a low pressure center that will likely form across areas into the Texas Panhandle. That will set the stage for a big time snowstorm across the middle of the country, a similar type setup that we actually saw in the month of January. And those could be packing some pretty significant winds along with it as well. So I appreciate all my subscribers out there. I would love to reach 350,000 subscribers by March. I put out a lot of content. So if you are new here, hit the subscribe button and follow along on a daily basis to keep you well ahead of the storm. So if we take a look at the setup heading into this weekend, we can see we've got a powerful vorticity that will be diving out west. And as the further it digs, the more energy it's going to be able to pick up. And I am definitely starting to get concerned about shearing across the south. And we could be looking at some stronger thunderstorms, even some severe weather coming back for southeast Texas into the Dixie Alley region. But this is going to have a lot of colder air associated with it diving into the Four Corners region. And as this continues to dig, that's going to provide enough lift mechanism that will be starting to get cold enough to start snowing, especially as we get into that Sunday time frame. If we look at the upper temperatures around the 5,000 foot mark, we can definitely see the transition to colder as we get into that Saturday afternoon time frame. So you've got plenty of warm conditions across into Texas and much of the southeast. That's where all the instability is. That's where I'm concerned about some stronger thunderstorms, especially as we go into Saturday night, going into that Sunday time frame across those southeastern regions of Texas, into East Texas, and going into that Louisiana, into Mississippi. But it's all going to be about the cold air, especially across the Four Corners region, as a pretty significant low pressure center looks to form along this boundary. And as it does, it's going to be able to transfer to all snow across the Texas Panhandle, especially as we get into that Sunday time frame. Because if you look at the overall 500 millibar on the winds, yeah, we've got some pretty significant winds, powerful jet stream coming across on the south side. That's why I'm concerned about some of those areas getting into severe weather category as we get into that Sunday timeframe across southeast Texas into Louisiana. But we've got a pretty significant low pressure center. You can almost see it here. It looks like a kind of an eye forming around the Texas Panhandle. That's where it's likely going to be some heavy snows into the Texas Panhandle, into western Oklahoma, getting into the Kansas region, and that is going to continue to intensify, especially as we get deeper into the day on Sunday. So if you wake up on Sunday morning, it's likely we have a pretty significant 996 millibar low pressure setting up across Oklahoma and the North Texas. Likely could be seeing some strong thunderstorms, but it's all about the snow, if not heavier snows, as the darker blues start to come to fruition. It's going to have a lot of water high content value with it. So we actually could end up with some pretty decent big times totals after this is all said and done, after this comes to fruition. But yes, right now, confidence is increasing on this developing snowstorm that will likely start to develop on Saturday night into eastern portions of New Mexico, coming out of Colorado, but especially as the low deepens over the Texas Panhandle into western Oklahoma, getting into the Kansas region. That's where we're looking at some heavier snows start to fall, and even the GFS ensemble. So we're starting to see kind of model congruency already starting to come together with that snow placement of the heavier snows across New Mexico into the Texas Panhandle. And there is the heavier rains and likely severe weather aspect into southeast Texas, through Louisiana, into Mississippi, getting into Alabama and heading into Georgia. But it's all about the snow in portions of western Oklahoma, especially getting into the Kansas region, as again, even on the European ensembles, has that cold core continued to intensify over Oklahoma, taking a beeline, and that kind of that panhandle hooker snow track that we actually saw in the month of January, setting up across the Texas Panhandle and then lifting up northeast. And that's exactly what likely is going to come to fruition again as this low continues to rapidly intensify, getting up into the upper Midwest and especially up into the Great Lakes. Looking at the vorticity, yeah, it's going to dive pretty far south here, so we'll have to fine tune this as it gets closer. But right now, it definitely appears that low is going to be right on the cusp of the Texas border, going into Oklahoma and heading into Arkansas, through Missouri, but especially into portions of Iowa, getting into northern Illinois, getting into portions of Wisconsin, as well as into Michigan, taking this likely storm track as this continues to race up into the northeast. And as it does, the low pressure will continue to deepen. And the further it deepens, the more intense that snowfall will likely be up there into the upper Midwest. And like I mentioned, we had a similar storm track like this in the month of January. And recall the blizzard that unfolded. It's almost like deja vu as we have another potential 979 millibar low pressure highlighted over Michigan by next Monday timeframe, with some pretty significant snows falling out of there and some pretty significant winds. They just had one off the California coast today and dumping some high wind gusts for that region. So you know what happened last time with some of these significant winds getting upwards to 50, 60, even some upwards to 70 miles an hour during that time span in January. It's likely going to be happening again. So if we kind of look at the wind swath, as the low pressure will start to deepen across those areas into Colorado, into eastern portions of New Mexico, getting in the Texas Panhandle, these will be packing some pretty healthy wind gusts along the way. And as the low continues to deepen, those winds are going to be cranking up as well. So we'll be fine tuning this as this gets closer. But right now, we could be easily talking about 50, 60, maybe even upwards to possibly 70 mile per hour wind gust in some of these isolated areas, especially as you get up here and across the upper Midwest into the Great Lakes region as we get into that Monday timeframe. But on the surface map, we're starting to get a lot of global model congruency. And that's why I'm mentioning this in this afternoon update, with some heavier snows as we head into Sunday night, into Oklahoma, through Kansas there, and back into portions of Missouri, as that low pressure center will be all rain on the southern flank here, and likely some severe storms across the Dixie Alley region. And then it's just a kind of a chillier rain through Tennessee, into Kentucky, into southern portions of Illinois. But it's all snow, and it could be the heavier snows come to fruition coming out of Missouri, into Iowa, into northern Illinois again, and into portions of Wisconsin, and back into Michigan, as this low pressure center will continue to deepen. And then it's all rain across into the mid-Atlantic and getting up into the northeast. But it's all snow coming in on the backside, as that low pressure center will be down to somewhere in the upper 970 range by then, cranking out those significant winds. And yes, we could even be talking like blizzard-like conditions then across the upper Midwest, upper Great Lakes, as the temperatures will start to plunge and coming on the backside with some heavier snows and even lake effect induced snowfalls by then with that backside snows. And those would obviously increase big time with that aspect coming to the picture. But the Canadian is pretty much on board as well. So right now we've got the European and the Canadian, as well as the GFS ensembles, all kind of implying the same thing, with the storm track coming in from eastern New Mexico, southeastern portions of Colorado here, into northern the Texas Panhandle, getting into western Oklahoma, through this region of Missouri, through northern Illinois, into Wisconsin, and back into Michigan, and all end up into the upper Great Lakes and southern Canada there, with some pretty significant snowfall totals. But right now, here's kind of the preliminary storm track as this comes to fruition, as it comes out of the Four Corners region. So remember, we're coming off of that big time atmospheric river event that will likely end on Thursday. Then all that transfers and finally brings that colder air down on Friday, especially as you get into Saturday. If you have that trough digging in, and the further it digs, the more energy it's going to be able to pick up. So pretty significant snows across those mountain ranges. Midland likely forms that low pressure center around the Texas Panhandle and takes this swath northeast and takes a bullseye up there in northern Illinois into the Great Lakes region. So here's where the European ensembles are printing out, kind of taking us that storm track right along this boundary. So we could be looking at a pretty significant snowstorm by the time it actually comes to fruition, as we're making that kind of a transition from that warm to cold. And then by the time we head into all next week, I think for a good part of the lower 48 is definitely going to be on the cold side, because right now all ensembles are on board as we head towards the middle of the month, the 15th, 16th time frame. Yeah, here's an ensemble print right now across the lower 48, has most of the cold as we get the cold air trapped underneath. We got the blocking over the top in Greenland. We got the blocking over the top in Alaska. That's going to pull the colder air underneath, and that's going to be able to deepen and dig, as a lot of the teleconnections are finally starting to come together, and showing that pattern change is going to be the real deal with the much colder air, especially as we head into the middle part of February. And that looks to continue into that third week and that last half of February as well, as things look to be pretty active on the winter storm front, especially as we head into that second half of February. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch the next update, where I protect you before and after storm.